Now let's discuss other stories in the global media. We start with the front page of The Guardian, which reports on the EU and UK's latest failure to reach an agreement over the Irish border ahead of the crucial Brexit summit, which is, of course, later this week. Next to Germany's Deutsche Welle, which looks at the bad news for German Chancellor Angela Merkel's sister Conservative Party, which has suffered significant losses in the state elections in Bavaria, according to the results we've had so far. The Times, which has an interview with author Lionel Shriver about her criticisms of the hashtag MeToo movement a year on from the campaign to highlight sexual harassment and assault. BBC Online looks at the UK taking a tentative step towards a radical green future with zero emissions of greenhouse gases. It follows last week's UN report warning time is running out to limit a climate change catastrophe. And then this is the story we're discussing today. We're asking for your solutions. The Daily Telegraph looks at the new pilot scheme being started in the UK to try and address the growing number of people feeling lonely and isolated in society and the health problems that then brings. Well, as you know, Stephanie's with us today. Stephanie Hare, independent analyst, so let's get stuck in. We start with The Guardian, but many newspapers have this on the front page. Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, sort of doing a whistle-stop tour to try and get some last-minute negotiations with Michel Barnier and bearing no fruit whatsoever.
Yes, it's almost as though this question of what to do with the border with Ireland is challenging, which of course we've been told the entire way through since the referendum that this was going to be easy to do. It was agreed by EU leaders and Britain last year, just in December, and again in March, they were going to put in writing that there will be no hard border with the Republic of Ireland. However, getting the language around that and trying to figure out what that means in terms of the customs union and the single market, once we get into the actual reality and nitty-gritty of this, is proving to be an absolute blocker. And so that's where we still are, a year later.
That's where we still are, and The Guardian talks about the fact that this is a major setback for Theresa May because, of course, Brussels is trying to establish what it wants and what it believes Ireland wants, but at the same time, Theresa May has to keep her party behind her, or her cabinet, or even enough of it to try and see some of this through. And it would seem that's proving impossible for her.
Yeah, it's really interesting if we try and look at what parts are moving and which ones are stable. So the EU and the Republic of Ireland have kept a pretty consistent line throughout. Where we're seeing problems, I think, is here within the United Kingdom because, of course, Theresa May's government depends on support from the DUP in Northern Ireland. And their leader, Arlene Foster, this weekend has said she's bracing for a no-deal Brexit.
She's bracing for a no-deal Brexit. Theresa May was hoping for a backstop, i.e. some sort of fudge that would give them more time. Some call it kicking the can down the road, but it means that actually on Wednesday at this crucial EU summit, there'd be some sort of progress on this issue so that it could be presented to the other EU member states.
Exactly. I mean, every time when we sort of watch anything to do with the EU, it's like a little dung beetle moving its little piece, you know, sort of inch by inch, and that's what we call progress. And you use the word muddling through and fudging, and that's exactly what we have seen throughout this entire thing, and indeed in the Euro crisis. So there's nothing new there. I think the problem is that we're really dealing with something that's just, it's kind of non-negotiable. We've heard people talk about using blockchain or technology, having the sort of border inspection carried out in the sea or in ports or away. But at the end of the day, there's really no way around this.
Before it heads off, the goods, whatever it might be. But that's a problem when it comes to agricultural products. That's not necessarily so easy to implement.
Yeah, and it's not easy for Theresa May, of course, because she's had her former Brexit secretary, David Davis, you know, appealing for the cabinet to exert its collective authority to kill off May's plans. So she is in such a weak position when she tries to negotiate with the EU, because everyone knows, I mean, they're reading the same paper as we are, that there's all this drama happening back here in the United Kingdom, and of course across the Irish Sea with Northern Ireland. So she's not in a great position, but the question is that theatre? Is she using that to her advantage? And crunch time is going to be this week. We'll find out.
We shall find out. I mean, in Salzburg, of course, she left, you know, with very strong words about the EU not moving and the difficulty they were having. This summit on Wednesday is being called the Moment of Truth Summit. So we shall see. Yes. We shall watch this space and report on it as it unfolds. But let's now take a look at Angela Merkel's situation in Germany. Again, she is also looking at a very tricky time for her coalition government, with her sister party in Bavaria losing their majority there.
Yes. Really interesting developments happening in Germany. So Angela Merkel's personal popularity remains quite high, but that of her CDU, which is the center-right party in Germany, has been eroding throughout the course of her chancellorship. And her sister party now in Bavaria, the CSU, is seeing the same thing. Is that necessarily a bad thing, though? Because she's been getting problems from her junior sister party over immigration. So actually, to see that tempered down in the short term, because the Greens are in the ascendant, might actually help her now. But the wider trend within Germany sort of reminds me a bit of what we saw in France, frankly, which is this erosion of the center-right and the center-left. So what you end up getting, in some cases, extreme right or extreme left support, or in the case
France,
of Germany,
something completely new.
Something completely new, exactly like Emmanuel Macron introduced. But in Germany, what we're seeing is this other alternative, which is rising support for the Greens. Now, the Greens have been sort of called the next party several times, and we've definitely seen them share power in coalitions throughout the 16 federal governments. It'd be really interesting to see, given the UN climate change report last year, is that going to become the sort of acceptable alternative for people who would have voted for the SPD or the CDU?
Yeah, as you say, it's a really interesting development. We'll get back to that issue of the green agenda in just a second. But before we get on to that, let's look at this story in the Times, which is about Lionel Shriver, who is talking about the hashtag #MeToo movement. This is at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. She's best known for her prize-winning novel, We Need to Talk About Kevin. What is she saying?
She's saying that she thinks that hashtag #MeToo as a movement has had its time. And I think also what's interesting here is she seems to think that too many things are being thrown into the same bucket. So we have something from as extreme as sexual harassment in the workplace to I went on a bad date or had some sort of trauma 20 years ago
so
that now has to be discussed. Well, it's either been diluted or opened as widely as possible so that as many people as possible can put forth their stories and we have a wider discourse. It really depends on your point of view on that. But she's had enough and is ready to move on.
And what do we think about that? There are other opinions in this article, aren't there?
Yes. I thought the one that was really interesting was from the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who's best known for his book, The End of History and the Last Man. And he talks about this really interesting trend that we are seeing in certain parts of the world about identity politics and how your identity as a woman or as a man or as a Republican or a Democrat in the United States or here in the UK, Brexit, I think revealed a lot of tribal identities, is really why are we seeing people cling to those identities so much as opposed to being American or British or French or a religious identity, something else. So yeah. he had a much more nuanced take on that.
It's really interesting. There's a lot of discussion about hashtag #MeToo and what it has achieved or hasn't achieved or what it may achieve in years to come. So it's definitely worth looking into, and that's a story that's being discussed today in the Times. You know what, I'm going to be naughty and I'm going to skip over the zero carbon economy story that's in the BBC, but I will tweet it, folks, so that you can have a read at your own leisure. But I want to talk about this story about loneliness because we've asked our viewers for ideas on this. The Daily Telegraph looking at a government scheme that's starting today in some places, Liverpool, New Malden, South West London and Whitby. Cookery classes being recommended by doctors, that kind of thing, to get people into groups. Post men, women dropping in on people who they feel could be isolated. It's a big problem.
It's a problem
for all sorts of people, not just elderly people.
Well, I mean, the elderly statistic was so shocking to me when I read this, saying that around 200,000 older people have not had a conversation with a friend or a relative in a month. And you just think, what on earth has happened to our families and our friendships? How could that even be possible? But you're so right to raise the point that it's not just the elderly, it's a much more widespread phenomenon. And the health impacts are the equivalent of like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I mean, this is measurable impact.
It's a big issue. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for being with us. And as ever,